The best way to make the most amount of money as an Uber driver and a Lyft driver is driving at the right time. And things are always changing when it comes to Uber and Lyft, and of course, the landscape when it comes to driving. So in this video, I'm gonna talk about the 5 best times to drive to make the most amount of money in 2026. Number 1, peak hours. I know, Uber and Lyft 101, but I have to mention it. When it comes to the peak hours, these are usually the times where people are ordering the most amount of Ubers and Lyfts. And across the board, there's usually 1 or 2 big pockets. 1, morning and evening commutes. So you're talking about 7 to 9 a.m., 5 to 7 p.m. And then on Friday and Saturday nights, we probably all know this, I'd say it does depend on a Friday and Saturday night. I'd say look at about starting around 7 or 8 p.m., getting down at around 3-ish a.m. Now, of course, this does depend city to city, area to area. I know some people who say, hey, you know what? I actually can drive from 7 to 10 a.m. because maybe people are still getting to work late and there's still a good amount of time from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. When I first started driving in Boston, I'm not gonna lie, after about 8:45 or 9 o'clock, wasn't worth it to drive at all. But I know some drivers who might say, hey, I drive from 7 to 10. Same thing with evening commutes, like say 5 to 7 p.m., but a lot of people might work till 6 or 7, so maybe 5 to 8 p.m. might work in your city, or maybe even 4 to 8. So this is something you do want to test out. And that's one thing I will say as a big important note on this video, that although these are very specific that I'm mentioning, every city is different, every layout's different. So definitely test it out. The more you test it out, the more money you're gonna make, because you realize, if I start at 4:30, there's actually already surges happening. So maybe you go from 4:30 to 7:30 as opposed to 5 to 7 or something like that. Same thing on a Friday and Saturday night. If let's say you're in an area like Vegas or LA or especially Miami, 2 a.m., people are still out and still partying. So maybe in Miami, you right off doing, as opposed to like say 8 to 3, maybe 9 to 4, for example. Number 2, events. Now this is a big one. And I want to say it's an important side note. In the description below, I have 2 videos that you can check out when it comes to Uber tricks and tips and hacks in the app that you probably didn't know, and same thing with Lyft. Basically, all these features in the Uber driver app and the Lyft driver app that you probably don't know about. And one of them is going to even give you alerts with events, because I'm telling you, events, out of anything on this list, maybe besides one other one, which we'll talk about in a second, can make you the most amount of money, because typically things are surging, 1, a lot. So you're talking about peak earning potential. But 2, sometimes it can be in off hours. So for example, let's say it's a Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Usually not popping. But if there's a Taylor Swift concert, if there's a big, let's say, sport game going on, if there's a big convention, let's say it's a place in Vegas, in your city there's like a convention center and it gets on at 8 p.m., you best believe that on Wednesday night at 8 p.m., it's raging. I remember when I drove in Boston, when it was graduation time, like when people were graduating, I remember there's one streak where I drove for almost 2 days straight. It was like nonstop. And like Tuesday at 1 p.m., when everyone's going to graduations, people are drinking, they're having fun, they're out maybe tailgating even. At 1 p.m. on a Tuesday, I remember it was raging with the higher surges more than a Friday night. So keep in mind, events are important. And I wanted to mention that when it comes to the apps, because you can actually set alerts within the apps to be like, hey, like here's going to be almost like an alarm clock going off to notify you to go out and drive. But 2, you can very quickly and easily every week see what's going on that week. And this is something I can suggest you do, because it takes you 2 seconds. Like say on a Sunday night and you just had a good week, Sunday night you pull up, you look at the app for maybe a few minutes and it says, hey, this Tuesday at 9 p.m. is when a basketball game is going to get out. This Thursday, there's a big concert going out. And what they'll do on the apps, especially Lyft, I think I like the way Lyft is laid out more than Uber personally. But remember, you could still look at the Lyft app, but then drive for Uber. So keep in mind, you can kind of utilize each other's apps tricks, so to speak, and carry them over. But what Lyft will do, which I kind of like, is to kind of say like estimating earning potential in terms of what time. So for example, Lyft will say, hey, the game gets done at 7:30. But if you start driving at 7, we've calculated that's more optimal, because let's say people are leaving late, let's say people want to just beat the rush home, which a lot of people do when it comes to any kind of event. This is a big thing to keep in mind. I'm telling you, with events, I would almost try to, let's say every Sunday night, plan your week out. You're like, okay, morning commutes, evening commutes, Friday and Saturday nights, kind of in the books. But this Thursday night, there's a concert, there's an event, there's a convention, there's a whatever. you gotta drive. Number 3, bonuses and incentives. One thing I've noticed is the drivers who make the most amount of money, who love driving for Uber and Lyft, focus on the bonuses. They don't just casually scroll through the app, they study them. Because here's the thing. If it's, let's say, a random Tuesday and nothing is going on, there's no events, yeah, you have the peak hours, but it's a Tuesday, that kind of thing. Maybe not that much. But if Lyft or Uber randomly says, hey, on this Tuesday, we're gonna give you X amount of money if you do this. We're gonna do a thing for the next 3 days where if you do these tiers and you hit these kind of thresholds and you kind of do these milestones, we're gonna give you a huge bonus. That is definitely something to look at, because especially if you combine them with events, this is, I think, the surefire way to make the most amount of money. Because I'm gonna be honest, we'll talk about this later in this video. Peak hours are not what they used to be. We will talk about that in a second though. So we'll talk about that in a second. But for now, I do wanna say that when it comes to bonuses and incentives, I've noticed when it comes to the drivers who just make the most amount of money, sometimes even $5, $10, $15, $20 more per hour than a driver who doesn't, they focus on the bonuses. And what's tough about bonuses and incentives, they can be kind of random. Sometimes there is a thing to predict, sometimes there's not. And this is why you do want to make sure you kind of you don't have to live within the app. But it's not a bad idea. Like, say you come back from driving, you're watching Netflix, you're relaxing, pull up the app for maybe 3 minutes, just look through the bonuses. Look at the notifications. They may have an alert saying, hey, you know what? New notification, we're doing a bonus tomorrow for blah, 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 blah. And then you could do that and drive. And again, these are something that are not necessarily as predictable. Like peak hours will always be there. Events, not necessarily always gonna be there, but there's always gonna be events, if that makes sense. Where yes, it's kind of random, but there will always be events. The bonuses, they'll always be there, but the strategy behind them and everything will change and fluctuate. But if you can get good at kind of developing your own strategies, and a lot of drivers I've talked to who make a lot of money, it's kind of funny, usually have their own techniques, being like, oh yeah, so they have this bonus once a week. And what I do is I start driving here, but then I do this, and they have all these kind of chess, not checkers type mentality when it comes to their approach to it, and it works. And that's a way to make a lot of money. Number 4, secondary peak hours. Now I want to say, with these secondary peak hours, I actually feel like these can sometimes make more money than what I'm going to call the primary peak hours. We'll talk about that in the next point as to why specifically. But primary peak hours, like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, kind of Uber Lyft 101, morning, evening commutes, Friday and Saturday nights. Secondary peak hours are times you can make still a good amount of money, sometimes even more. So don't overlook these. First one to say, as a pocket of secondary peak hours, I've never done it. Sounds horrible, but I know a lot of drivers swear by this. Early, as I'm talking 4 a.m. So 4 a.m. to let's say 10 a.m. And I know a lot of drivers who I've talked to who are like, yeah, I do the airport rides. I wake up at 3:30, start driving at 3:45 or 4, and I drive from 4 to let's say 7-ish, give or take. So I'm doing these airport rides. And around 7-ish, the airport rides then slowly transition into the morning commutes. And I know some drivers are like, hey, you know what? I start driving at 4, I wake up at 3:30, drive for 6 hours, get done at 10, and guess what? I'm done for the day. I work 6 hours straight. I have the entire day to do whatever I want. I can go to the beach. I can do this or this. They have the entire day to do whatever they want. And I know some drivers who said, look, I make so much money from the airport rides, 1, because sometimes I can pay a lot of money, but 2, the tips. Tips tend to be higher with airport rides, usually helping people with their luggage. They're in a good mood usually. Like say they're going to the airport to say go on a vacation potentially. And in addition, I think when people have that kind of free spirit, oh, we're going to the airport, maybe even grab an airport beer or something. When they have that kind of mentality, a lot of times people are like, hey, you know what? I'm in a good mood. I'm going on vacation. I'm going to grab a drink at the airport. It's 5 a.m., but who cares? Time doesn't matter at the airport. I'm going to give this driver a big tip. So the first thing when it comes to secondary commuting hours, peak hours, big one when it comes to going to the airport. And then again, you can even transition, like I said, from the airport rides to the commuting rides in terms of the morning commuting hours. Secondary one is what I call the pregame hours. One of the biggest questions that I get asked is people said to me, you know what, Mark, I want to drive on a Friday, Saturday night, but I don't deal with drunk people. Understandably so. For me, I actually prefer driving around drunk people. I think it's more fun, more vibrant. But again, everyone's different. And they're like, but I know that's the best time to make a lot of money. In 2026, gotta be honest, no. On a Friday and Saturday night, yes, you can make a good amount of money, but if you do events, if you do the bonuses, if you do other things I'm talking about in this video, you really don't have to drive around drunk people. Second thing I'm gonna say about this is what I call the pregame hours. These are the times when people are going out to their friend's place. They're not drunk yet, so you don't have to deal with them, but they're getting ready to be drunk. Let me say it like that. I'd say Friday from 5 p.m. to about 9, Saturday about the same, 5 to 9, maybe 10. And what's good about this is with Friday night, for example, you could do the kind of evening commuting hours, 5 to 7 p.m. And then around 7-ish, it transitions into the nighttime in terms of the pregame hours. Also, people getting, let's say, off of happy hour, they get done at work, they leave the bar that they just went to happy hour from at like 6 or 7, then they go and actually go to do X, Y, or Z. Like, so these are the good hours where people are going out. Sometimes it's surging, sometimes even more than the Friday night itself, because people are getting ready to go out. They're going to a friend's place to pregame. They're kind of bouncing around. They're getting ready to get started, but they're not in it yet, so to speak. And this is a good way to make a lot of money where, like, say, I remember for me, for example, I'd actually, which is kind of funny, I would drive sometimes, like say on a Friday night, from like 5 to like say 9, get done driving, be like, wait, I just made a good amount of money for those 4 hours. I hit the evening commutes, but then also the pregame hours. Then I grab my DJ equipment and I go and DJ a gig. I always wanted, it never happened as a side note, I always wanted to, like, say, someone be like, wait a minute, is the DJ our Uber driver who drove us here? It never happened, but I always wanted it to happen. But anyway, I think when it comes to secondary peak hours, I'm gonna say as a second one, again, we have the airplane rides or airport rides, so 4 a.m. Second one is pregame hours. Third one is what I'm gonna say Saturday and Sunday mornings. A lot of times around like say 10 or 11 a.m., it's surging pretty well because people like say wake up at their friend's place, they had a crazy night, maybe not the best morning though, they want to go home. Or like say people going out to brunch, they're doing a Sunday fun day, maybe they're going to do something on a Saturday, they don't feel like driving. Like say here in LA, a lot of people are like, hey, I'm not even drinking, but I don't want to deal with the beach parking. Way easier to get an Uber and get dropped off than having to deal with the airport, the beach parking, and even finding a parking spot can be a nightmare. Sometimes it's more expensive actually paying for parking than getting an Uber, So these are the three big, what I'm gonna call them, secondary peak hours. We can make a lot of money. One, like I said, airport rides starting at 4 a.m., 2, the pregame hours, and then 3, Saturday and Sunday mornings. Number 5, non-peak hours. Now this is pretty much, which is gonna sound weird, but just, hear me out. Especially for 2026, this is almost any other time. And you're like, wait a minute, Mark, so you're telling me pretty much drive whenever? That doesn't make any sense. This video is a waste of time. Here's what I'm gonna say, and this is something that's very big for 2026. There's something that's been existing for the past couple of years. I've talked about it in some videos. My dedicated subscribers know about it that I've mentioned. And I'm gonna call it the peak hour paradox. Right now, in 2026, it has never been harder to get a ride. I'm just gonna say it like that. With Waymos and self-driving cars and Zooks, self-driving cars are everywhere. In addition, more people than ever before with the economy, with how easy it is to drive, how flexible Uber and Lyft is, there's never been more people signing up to drive. And as a result of this, I've interviewed a lot of drivers. I typically interview almost every driver that I go out with. Any single time I go out and I get an Uber, I interview the driver. And one thing I noticed, which I thought was really interesting, is I've had drivers like say here in LA say, yeah, you know what? I don't drive on Friday nights anymore. Like every driver goes to drive on Friday night. So because there's so many drivers out there and only a finite amount of rides to go around, I actually don't make that much money on Friday night. I actually make more money on a Thursday night, maybe Thursday or something like that. So it's interesting is there are some drivers having this mentality now where they're like, look, it's so hard to get a drive. It's so hard to get a ride. When it comes to driving, I just want to get a ride. And the issue is on the peak hours, which used to be the best times to drive, it's now becoming less and less the case. It's almost this paradox that if everybody goes to drive on a Friday night, well, no one really makes as much money as before. And then it begs the question, well, when do you drive? This is something I want to say as a quick side note, and this is probably the best piece of advice I can give in this video. Always track everything. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Looking into your analytics can be the best. Because like I said, maybe in your area, like I know in Denver, Colorado, when I've interviewed drivers there, the airport rides apparently aren't worth it. So a lot of drivers in Denver maybe waking up at 4 a.m. to do a airport ride in Denver isn't worth it. In LA, it's the opposite. I know LA, with the way LAX is kind of in the heart of LA. In Denver, in case you know, the airport's pretty far away. But in LA, the airport's pretty much right there. So I know a lot of drivers in LA who say, yeah, the 4 a.m. rides do wonders. I know in Boston, a lot of drivers raved about the 4 a.m. rides. So what I suggest for a lot of people is test everything out. You may find out that maybe in your area, with the peak hour paradox, where there being a finite amount of rides to go around, Friday nights are just not good at all. Hate to say they might just not be it, but Thursday nights might be. Like I know, for example, in a lot of areas, Thursday night is a big night when it comes to colleges. I know some of my friends, I remember even this in college, preferred going out on a Thursday night than a Friday night. So maybe Thursday, so to speak, is a better time to drive for you. Thursday night, gotta be honest, to me, I don't consider that a peak hour. But because of the peak hour paradox, for you it might be. And it almost becomes this kind of issue of like, even if it's not a standard peak hour, morning, evening commute, Friday, Saturday nights, peak hour really just means when you can make the most amount of money. And it varies now. And I think that's one thing to keep in mind, that in 2026, more than ever, things seem to be changing, I think, a little bit with Uber and Lyft, especially with self-driving cars throwing a lot to the mix. And basically, with too many drivers being on the road, too many cooks in the kitchen, as I've talked about in a lot of videos, then you add self-driving cars into the mix, it's harder and harder to get a ride. And with more drivers than ever before going out to drive just on a Friday and Saturday night, because that's Uber and Lyft 101. When do you want to make the most amount of money? Friday and Saturday night. Not the case now, it seems like. Now, granted, it could depend. Maybe for you, you're like, Mark, I don't know what you're talking about. Friday nights, I still make the most amount of money. Awesome. But I know a lot of drivers who I've interviewed who say, no, now actually, sometimes even on a Wednesday night, I make more money than a Friday night, because a lot of drivers think, who's going to order an Uber on a Wednesday night? That's where you come in. Who's going to order an Uber Tuesday night? That's where you come in. And it is this kind of thing that, again, a bit of a paradox where I'm almost like, wait a minute. Other times to drive in the peak hours might make you more money, but this is something I suggest to a lot of people to test it out. Because maybe at first glance, you're like, you know what, I'm never driving on a Wednesday night. Why would I ever do that? I'm not going to make that much money. Maybe you actually can. And I know some drivers, like I said, the one I'm thinking about in particular that I interviewed recently when it comes to LA, who said to me, yeah, I actually make more money now on a Wednesday night than I do on a Friday night. So I actually prefer driving on Wednesday nights. And then my Friday nights are free. And now a bonus time to drive to make the most amount of money with Uber and Lyft in 2026, legal hours. You may be thinking like, what do you mean by legal hours? Here's what I mean. The legal landscape of Uber and Lyft is changing more than ever before, especially in 2026. You have things that already happened, like say here in California with Prop 22. You have Massachusetts now having like unemployment assistance, paid sick leave, minimum hourly guarantees that no matter what, and all these other things going state to state now. It's becoming a bigger trend, if I say it like that, for states to give Uber and Lyft drivers benefits. They're not employees, they're not independent contractors, they're this middle ground of independent contractors with benefits. Kind of like you're not dating, you're not single, you're friends with benefits, in a sense. Pretty good analogy, I think. And here's the reason why I say that is because, let's say Tuesday at 1 p.m. I'm going to be honest. Nothing going on. Unless there's an event, unless there's a bonus, it's not really a peak hour. It's not really a secondary peak hour. Yeah, it's a non-peak hour, but it doesn't seem worth it at all to drive Tuesday at 1. Here's the thing, though, is if, let's say you have a minimum hourly guarantee where no matter when you drive, because of legal things that got put in your state, in your area, you still might be able to make a good amount of money per hour. This is something I will look into. The legal landscape of being a rideshare driver is evolving very rapidly, and it does depend state to state, but this is something you do want to look at. Now, granted, I will say this. No matter what, whether you look at it or not, you're probably going to get that, you're definitely going to get that bonus. So let's say you don't even know that a minimum hourly guarantee mandate just got put in your area. Uber and Lyft will now bump you up no matter what. But I do suggest looking into this. Because let's say you're trying to figure out a secondary job. Let's say you're like, look, I'm going to drive to make ends meet. I like the flexible schedule, but I can only drive Tuesday from 1 to 4. Or let's say Monday through Friday, 1 to 4 is the only time you can drive, given your potential schedule. Well, here's the thing. If you have a minimum hourly guarantee, well, let's say you're going to be making, no matter what, 18 an hour. I'm just making numbers up. That may be actually the best gig for you compared to, like, say, getting another job that maybe doesn't pay as much or something along those lines. This is something I want to say lastly on this video, because with everything I've said, it does depend situation to situation. And your location, in case you didn't know, is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make as a driver. Keep that in mind. And I think never before has that been more true, especially with self-driving cars being huge now in 2026. But even more so than that, I might even say, or in combination with that, the legal statutes. Because before, You could go out on a Tuesday, and I remember this, and I would drive for an hour and I'd make $4. That actually happened to me once. I'm like, I'm never driving Tuesday during the day ever again. But then started driving during Tuesday when the legal statutes got put into place, when there's a minimum hourly guarantee, and you're like, hey, no matter what, even if I make $3 an hour or $4 an hour, they're gonna bump me up. So I'm still making a good amount of money.